Hello, guys, and welcome back to Count to 10. My name is Ani, and today we have a live Practice Viva demonstration. I want to thank Celia for joining us. How are you feeling?
Feeling okay. I don't know.
You should be feeling pretty good. You're like 2 weeks out from the exam. We've done a lot of Vivas together already. We're going to keep it a very similar format. We'll do 1 minute perusal, two topics, 5 minutes each. On the day, you have 2 minutes perusal. So it's just a bit of difference of doing a 1 minute perusal. Do you have any questions about that?
No.
So before we get started, I want to thank you for doing this. I know it's nerve-wracking doing a Viva anytime, but doing a recorded Viva is an added amount of pressure. But I hope the people listening and watching to this will get some both non-technical and technical skills out of it. So thank you again for taking time to do this, and I know you'll smash it.
Thanks, Annie.
All right, are you ready to get started?
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's go straight into it, hey? So I'm going to put a minute perusal stopwatch on, and that'll start now. And your opening question is what is innate immunity? So just repeating that again, it is what is innate immunity? All right, that's 1 minute perusal. My name is Ani. Candidate, do you understand the opening question?
Yeah.
Great. Can you tell me what is innate immunity?
So innate immunity is essentially the first line of defense. It is non-specific, immediate, and does not require previous exposure. It includes your physical chemical barrier, cellular components, and humoral components as well.
Perfect. Can you tell me what types of physicochemical barriers do you know of?
So physical chemical barriers would include our skin, our major organ, as a defense mechanism. And we also have our gastric environment, which is acidic to kill pathogens. And we also have high urinary blood flow to prevent urinary tract infections as well. And we have the mucociliary elevator in the airways to prevent pathogens from getting into the alveoli.
Perfect. And do you know of any reflexes that are part of this physicochemical barrier?
So we have the cough reflex, the irritant reflex, that can prevent pathogens going into the alveoli.
Great. What is the cough reflex?
So the cough reflex is a coordinated control which prevents foreign substance or pathogens from getting into a sterile environment in the alveoli. So it has three parts to it. It has an inspiratory phase, a closure of the focal cord phase, and then expulsive phase to get the pathogen out of the alveoli and airway.
Yeah, good. So can a cough be voluntary or is it involuntary?
It can be both voluntary and involuntary.
Good. And you told me about the three stages. So tell me more about what happens in the compressive phase.
So in the compressive phase, you generate a high intrathoracic pressure.
Mhm.
So you increase your intra-abdominal pressure as well to, I guess, essentially generate enough pressure to expulse the contents in the airway lining.
Yeah, and during the expulsive phase, what kind of velocities are we talking about?
So it's high velocity. So I believe it's around like 60 liters per minute at least.
Yeah, and
So this
why are we trying to create these high velocities? What's so important about this with the cough reflex?
So you want to have shear forces so that we can get like mucus or pathogens on the airways, sticking to the airway to be expelled,
Yeah.
expelled out,
What if
essentially.
our cough was laminar flow? Would it be as effective?
No, so you want turbulent flow, so eddy currents, disorganized flow to get the to I guess in the peripheries of the airway. Um,
Good. What are the characteristics of laminar flow then?
so laminar flow is concentric flow with the center of the flow being parabolic. So it's streamlined, not disorganized.
Yeah, good. So when I give a patient a general anesthetic, how are the overall physicochemical barriers affected, not just the cough reflex?
So you get, I guess, depression of your cough reflex. Other things would be your function of the mucociliary tract is not as efficient because there isn't as much humidity as well, and you get mucus plugging as well due to the humidity. Um, Other things would be we also blunt the afferent efferent limb, so our muscular um, control is also blunted to prevent the cough reflex.
Yeah, good. What types of white cells do you know of?
White cells.
Yep.
So you have leukocytes and lymphocytes. Leukocytes are the non-specific part of the innate immune system. This would include neutrophils, macrophages, monocytes, basophils, eosinophils. And then you have lymphocytes that would be T cells, B cells, and you have natural killer cells too as well.
Okay, tell me about just the granulocytes. How do they work to defend the body against an infection?
So the granular cells would can be attracted to the site of the pathogen through chemotaxis, where there's leukotrienes and chemokines, not leukotrienes, leukotrienes and chemokines, and you have enzymes within these granules that can be released and degrade the pathogen, but they can also engulf the pathogens, causing phagocytosis to
Wait,
kill the bacteria as
what are
well.
antigen presenting cells?
So antigen presenting cells would include macrophage and neutrophils. So they have they're able to process the antigens of, or they can process pathogens, and one of their protein would be presented as an antigen
Okay,
on
we're going to
the, I
stop there
believe,
and go to the next topic now. Can you tell me, in a healthy 40-year-old adult, what is normal intracranial pressure?
in a healthy 40-year-old patient, it would be around 5 to 15 millimeters per mercury.
Right, and if you had to estimate in an 80-year-old healthy patient, how would you think the intracranial pressure would differ? Would it be higher or lower?
Uh, Just going to first principles, you get atrophy of the brain parenchyma, so I would expect it to go lower.
Okay, and how did you calculate that?
So the intracranial pressure is composed of your brain parenchyma volume, CSF volume, and cerebral blood volume. So the brain parenchyma makes up about 85% of the volume within your cranium.
Yeah, good. And what is the rest of it then? What are the rest of the percentages?
And then, so 85% is the brain parenchyma, about 10% is CSF, and 5% is the cerebral blood volume.
Perfect. And what is known by the term Monroe-Kelly doctrine?
So Monroe-Kelly doctrine states that the cranium is a fixed fault, so an increase in volume of one of the components requires a decrease in the volume of the other components, or else that you get a raised intracranial pressure.
Good. So what is normal cerebral blood flow?
Normal cerebral blood flow is 50 mils per 100 grams per minute, or 750 mils per minute.
Good. And how is that blood flow distributed between gray and white matter?
I would think that more blood flow would go to the white matter than the gray matter.
Yeah, and do you know by percentage how much?
I can't recall the percentage, but I would say probably about 60% to the white matter and about 40%
That's
to
all
the
right,
gray
minor
matter.
point. What are the determinants of blood flow to the brain?
So the determinants of blood flow to the brain, so cerebral blood flow equals to cerebral perfusion pressure over the cerebral vascular resistance, and cerebral perfusion pressure is essentially mean arterial pressure minus your ICP or CVP, depending on which is higher.
Right. So in that equation that you just mentioned, if you had to pick one factor as the most important, which one would it be?
I would probably say cerebral vascular resistance.
Right. Why do you say that?
Because the resistance of the cerebrovascular resistance, it has multiple factors that affect it. So you have neuronal activity. So increase your neuronal activity, you get vasodilation. So it decreases resistance. High PCO2 would decrease resistance as well with vasodilation.
Yep.
O2. So you have the myogenic autoregulation, metabolic autoregulation, and the cerebrovascular coupling.
Okay. So
That connects you.
going back to the equation now, if I was to ask you what's your CPP right now, what would it be?
My CPP, it would, sorry, 15, 16, probably 50, 60 millimeters per mercury.
And how'd you calculate that?
So with MAP, I guess normal math, I would assume my math would be like around 70 millimeters per mercury. And then if your ICP normally is 5 to 15, so 70 minus 5 to 15 would probably be about 50 to 60 in that range.
Do you think your map is normally 70 right now?
At this moment, no.
So what do you think how do you calculate your normal map?
So math is, I think 2/3 of your diastolic plus 1/3 of your systolic pressure.
Mhm. Yeah. And so are you sure that your CPP at the moment is 60?
No, it's probably higher.
Okay, all right. And what do you think your CVP is, so your central venous pressure?
My CVP would be, I think it's normally like 2 millimeters per mercury.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So how does CVP get affected if I take a patient and give them IPPV, so intermittent positive pressure ventilation?
So with the increase in your intrathoracic pressure, you get an increase in your CVP.
Yeah.
And when you release that intrathoracic pressure, it will return back to the normal baseline
And how would the
CVP.
CVP change if I say add 10 centimeters of PEEP to that?
It would increase.
Yeah, good. And how would this affect your ICP? Actually, we're going to stop there. That's right on time. You can answer that question if you want or not.
Sorry, the question was how would it affect your ICP?
Yeah.
It would increase your ICP because you'll get a increased resistance of your venous blood flow back
Good.
to the systemic circulation.
Nice. So we're done. How do you feel?
Not great.
You did really well. What's your heart racing at? Fast, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
You did really well. That was really good. There were really two strong vibers. Um, if you had to rate yourself and give yourself a mark for the first and the second viva, what would you say? Did you think you passed them, failed them, did okay?
I think the first one I would probably be on on a scale of 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. I think this first one would be like a 1.5 or a 2. And then the second one would probably be like a 2.
I think you're very harsh on yourself, and I think you would have passed both of those vibers pretty comfortably if I was marking you. And we'll just go through them one by one, but first we'll talk about the non-technical stuff. So I think overall, your approach and your mannerism was very good. You had a very open approach. You were easily directable. You didn't get, and if you didn't know something, you didn't get stuck on it or fixate on it, which is a very important point when you're doing these because it's 5 minutes and really your end goal should be the time is marked. So you're trying to get through as many questions as possible to get as many points as possible. So I think when you didn't know something, you thought about it. You even used the term going back to first principles. And that's with the second bar where you have like this weird question, which you never been thought about probably, which is if you compare a 40-year-old and an 80-year-old's map, you went back to the Monroe-Key doctrine and you use that really well. From the non-technical stuff, you went back to your basic kind of knowledge and answered that. The other thing I think you did really well was your ability to answer questions and move through the Viva was pretty good. So we got through at least 10 to 12 questions with each Viva, which I think is roughly probably the part where you've gone past the pass mark in just terms of sheer volume of questions you've been asked. And those questions weren't the same questions. You know, they weren't, I wasn't trying to go back and ask you questions to help clarify something. We were going on to the next topic. And the other thing is, which just in terms of general advice for non-technical stuff, which I always tell people, which we didn't do here because I didn't get you to draw anything. If we ever get you to draw something, just try to verbalize as you draw, but we didn't have this in this component at all. Um, the last thing with the non-technical stuff that I think you did really well is when you answered a question, you offered a little bit of information and then you stopped. So you just didn't answer the question. You gave me a little bit of extra just so that maybe you answered it in the sense that you were trying to predict where the vibe was going, but you didn't spend too much time trying to give me an answer, which then I wouldn't have wanted if I was going down another pathway. So I think that was done really well. So now going to the technical stuff. So the first fiber, which is really unfair fiber, which is what is innate immunity, because it's a peripheral topic.
Yeah.
Um, so you think you didn't do as well in this one as you did in the first one. Was there a particular part that you were worried about or thought you didn't have as good knowledge in?
I think the cough reflex, I need to refresh that a bit more.
Yeah, I think you nailed the three stages of the cough reflex. It's very hard to remember the three stages, but you remember the principles of the three. And really, in this fiber, I don't really care if you don't know too much about innate immunity. I always try to link something to a clinical aspect, and the main clinical thing I try to link this to is understanding the reason why cough is so important is because it generates turbulent flow. And without turbulent flow, you're not able to get rid of all those nasty things within your airway tract. If your cough becomes laminar, it becomes ineffective. And we really worry about the cough because it's one of those first reflexes that goes when you give someone propofol or any other drugs. And it's
Yeah.
an endpoint that we try to see in patients to make sure they can protect their own airway. And you want them to have an effective cough, which is essentially you want them to be able to generate enough turbulent flow to clear out their secretions to protect their own airway. And that's the important part. And you got that part because you understood that you want turbulent flow. And you understood the difference between laminar flow was that you get those velocity profile. So the stuff on the side walls doesn't get picked up because there's no flow on that. The velocity on the side is pretty much non-existent. So without turbulent flow, you can't get that kind of gunk out. You classified really well early. So we talked about components of innate immunity and you classified physicochemical, humoral, and cellular. And then when I asked you types of physicochemical barriers, you did really well to classify them again into, urinary, biliary, without giving me too much information. So that if this fiber went down another pathway and it could have gone down a biliary route or whatever, at least I could then ask you about that because you mentioned it, but you didn't spend too much time in it, which was great. Reflexes, yeah, you got the cough reflex. It is voluntary and it can be involuntary. A true cough reflex needs to be involuntary because you can't generate the same amount of pressures with a voluntary cough. At least that's my basic understanding. And then the three phases are the inspiration phase, compressive phase, and then the expulsive phase. And that inspiration phase and compressive phase really help to make that expulsive phase really at like velocities, I think of up to like 80 to 100 kilometers an hour. So it's super high. So I think you just mentioned there was like 60 liters per minute, which is fine. It's a minor point, and I was going to pick you up on
Yeah.
that. And then because we went through that really well, we then talked about different things that can be affected with a GA. So just broad picture again, so you obviously had a barber that's been talking about cough, and then all of a sudden I've opened it up again and said, how do physicochemical barriers get affected during a GA? So it's a broad question again. So you can kind of go back to your structure and say, well, this is a broad question. You can take a moment to think and say, there's many ways that a GA can affect the physicochemical barriers, and that's giving your brain away time to think about how I can categorize this. And you can think about it through the perioperative journey. So you can say we put a cannula into someone that penetrates their skin barrier. We
Yeah.
give them drugs like dexamethasone and whatnot that might affect, their cellular function, but that's not physicochemical barriers per se. We might put an NG in someone. We might put a urinary catheter in someone.
Yeah.
We might, give them drugs that affect their cough. So there's multiple ways that the physicochemical barriers will be
Yeah.
affected. And that just goes back to sometimes that happens that you get a question that opens up everything again. So you go back to that structure.
Yeah.
And then you knew your cells really well. So that's high level knowledge, what types of white cells there are, You knew what an antigen presenting cells are. And this is again just going back to seeing what your depth of knowledge is. I don't think this really has importance clinically, but it's just seeing whether you've done the work, which you certainly have, to get to this stage. So that just shows that you've read all that, you've covered a peripheral topic. And certainly with peripheral topics, you hope the examiner will be a bit more lenient and just let you kind of go on. And then we pretty much got to the end of the Viva. The only last question I had was, what's the difference between innate immunity and adaptive immunity? But you answered that in your opening question. You didn't spend too much time in your opening question, which was great. Opening questions there to make you feel comfortable, not for you to ramble on, which you didn't do. So that was good. So I thought we went through that quite well. So that's a lot of feedback for the first one. Any questions on that?
Yeah, that was good. Very helpful.
Yeah, but I think you did really well, and I would have easily passed you for that. That's a really niche topic, but you covered everything well, and you got the main critical points. So then we go on to the ICP, which I think is a more core topic. And certainly you hit all the core topics you hit all the main points really well. So you mentioned the Monroe-Kelly doctrine without kind of mentioning it. And you could have made that answer a bit more nicer when you said, I estimate an 80-year-old will have a lower ICP because of brain atrophy using the principles of Monroe-Kelly doctrine. And then I wouldn't have to ask you what the Monroe-Kelly doctrine, or would have asked you and you would have gone, yeah. Because I'm sure you would have thought as you were saying it, like, the brain is 80%, the blood vessels and blood volume is 10%, and the CSF is 10%. Doesn't matter how you break it up. Some people do 5 and 15. But I'm sure when you were saying that, you were thinking of the Monroe-Kelly doctrine. So when you're thinking of a buzzword, you can just say it, because they're just going to ask it just to make sure that it might be just a tick point that they want, is that you mentioned that. Then we talked about normal cerebral blood flow, which was well done. It was just a bonus mark to see whether you knew grey and white matter differentiation. And again, you used first principles and said grey matter probably uses more, so therefore I think grey matter would have more. I don't really care if you didn't know the exact number. It's generally 80-20%, but as long as you use the first principle to say the grey matter had more, and I think you said 60%, that's totally fine. Then we talked about the equation for calculating cerebral blood flow. So cerebral perfusion pressure minus cerebral vascular resistance. You appropriately said vascular resistance is the most important because of, and here again, I think you said radius because the radius changes, but again, you can use that extra term and say, due to the Hagen-Purcell equation, where radius is to the power of 4, I think the CBR is the most important factor. Because you know that already, so it just solidifies that you've taken the basic knowledge and then just applied it into this setting. So then they don't have to ask you about the Hagen-Purcell equation, because you already said it's the power of 4, and then you can go into all the factors that affect CBR. So you can go like oxygen, CO2, or you can divide it even further and say there's metabolic, and then there's non-metabolic factors, and the non-metabolic might be other things, the water regulation and whatnot. Then we talked about CBP and CPP, and I think you got a bit stuck when I asked you what your CPP was.
Yeah.
Which is a normal thing, because I think we get taught that, especially in an ICU setting, that we aim for a MAP above 65. And so we commonly think that our MAP is somewhere around about 65, 70. But if we were to take our normal blood pressure, which is 120 on 80, based on, the basic formula, numbers that we give to everyone, then based on that, our normal MAP is around about 100. And you accurately said, which I thought was nice, in this situation where I'm stressed, it's probably higher. But if we know that your normal MAP is around about 100, and you know that your normal ICP is, say, an average of 10, then your normal CPP is around about 90. So this was just like being like, okay, we know the numbers, so just kind of here I was just pushing you to just see, can you just take it to the next step and just apply it to yourself, or just apply that. But then we recovered well, and you talked about CBP, and you said, it's between 2 to 5, or you said 2, and you mentioned the clear things, which was like it would increase with IPPV because of the increased venous pressures, and it would further increase with an addition of PEEP. And then the question after that was, how does that affect your ICP? And you said increase. And the next question would have been a drawing question if we got to it. And this would just been a bonus question about drawing the intracranial elastance curve. And then if you get drawn that, what do you think the next question is going to be after the elastance curve?
Probably why like there's a change in the shape or
Yeah,
like the compensatory mechanisms.
yeah, and that's exactly
So,
right. And my next question is, why does this curve have this shape? Exactly that. And then I would say, at what points do you expect ischemia to occur? So you'd have those 2 points, which would be 20 and 50 for regional versus global ischemia.
yeah,
And then it would go down to CV, CSF. And this Viva just keeps going. It's supposed to be like a 15-minute Viva. It just doesn't end because I can ask any questions I want based on that.
yeah.
But overall, that was a really strong Viva. You got through all the content. You didn't say anything that was outrageously wrong. You said stuff with reason, and you had good flow, and you got through a lot of questions. So I think you should be very happy with where you are now going into the exam. Any questions?
No, that was very helpful. Um, yeah.
No, you did really well. I want to thank you again for taking time to do this. Like I said, it's very nerve-wracking, but you performed really well. And I hope that people that are either going to watch this or listen to this will get something out of it. I know that they definitely will. Your performance was very good and it's very high level. So thank you again for taking time. And I just want to wish all the candidates the best of luck in the recent exam. So thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time on Count to 10.